Let me turn on the attendance. 1 second, please. It always logs me out. Sorry. Okay. All right. Please sign into the attendance. You out of breath?
Yes. Gotta practice.
Practice?
No more practice.
It's not like Allen Iverson practice, right?
Wait, what?
It's okay. Someone got that one. All right, good. All right. We start at 7:45. Just remember your time, everyone. Okay. All right. All right. So, any questions before we get started? All right. So let's just review our topics on the freedom of speech. Believe it or not, we've basically finished. Not finished, but we've more or less finished our topics on the different categories of speech. We'll do a little bit more next week, but we're mostly done with this topic. So when you get a free speech question, there are a lot of sort of different ways you can look at it. It's not like I know law students love flow charts, right, and diagrams and very neat paths from A to B, um, but it doesn't work that neatly. And the reason why is that the court's cases were developed over the course of 100 years or so, and they sort of scatter. So I put on the board 6 different sort of things to think about, maybe lenses or frames, however you want to look at it. I think this is a useful approach to walk through the doctrine. So the very first question we have to think about is what we're dealing with speech or is expressive conduct. You know, burning a draft card, burning a flag, what burning a cross, right? The readings today, what about social media? Is that expression? Is Facebook? Is that expression? Is it just dumb curation? Or is it automatic AI generated content? Is what we're talking about actually expressive speech? If it's not, the question becomes a lot simpler because the First Amendment doesn't really apply to it. But if it is some sort of speech or expressive conduct, you talk about it. What about if it's public or private? You know, if I make a remark to you and I say, you know, oh, I hear he's a fraudster, right? He engaged in criminal activity. And I just told just one person. Is that enough for defamation? Maybe not, right? There's actually an aspect of defamation, how broadly you disseminate a message. If it's just sort of private one-to-one, that's probably not enough for defamation. So even something might be speech, whether it's public or private, does make a bit of a difference. Then we start thinking about our categories, and there's lots of categories, right? You have a category of whether something's libelous, which is subject to the actual malice standard. We ask whether something's fighting words under Chaplinsky. Maybe something's inciting violence, but it's saved by the Brandenburg test, right? You have all these various categories that you should be thinking about when you approach these questions. Then a key question that comes up over and over again is the government discriminating on the basis of content or on the basis of viewpoint? Again, what's the difference? A viewpoint discrimination would say you can't protest the war, but you can celebrate the war, right? You can only do one side of the perspective. Content-based would say you can't say anything about the war, period, whether it's good or bad, right? So be sure to recognize the difference. Practically, they lead to the same place. If something is a content-based restriction, it's probably going to be subject to a strict scrutiny. It's not going to work. Excuse me. If there's a viewpoint-based discrimination, it's almost certainly unconstitutional. In some regards, the viewpoint-based discriminations are worse than the content-based because the government's picking a side. At least with content-based, they're saying no one can talk about it. But viewpoint saying only you can talk about it, but not you, right? Then we can think about our various tests for scrutiny. We have the O'Brien test. I'm not going to list the factors. I've done it many times before, but sort of keep those in your back pocket as well. Last week, we introduced something new, which we called forum analysis. This is the idea that depending where you speak, it could actually make a difference. So if you're protesting on a sidewalk or a public street, that's considered the quintessential public forum. Harder cases might be something like a library, right? Imagine a library rents its rooms to the public. They say anyone who wants to rent a room can rent a room. At that point, since they sort of designate a government building open to the public, they can't discriminate on the basis of viewpoint, right? They can't say, okay, we will allow Christians in, but not the Jews, right, or the Muslims. You have to be able to be open to all the various perspectives. Okay, but generally speaking, private forums, like you have a private club, they're not obligated to permit all views. Keep in mind for the social media case, we're going to read about it a little bit or discuss later today. Where does Facebook and Twitter fit in? Are those public forums? Are those private forums? A related question, let's say a politician blocks a constituent on social media. You've seen this before, right? Trump blocked people all the time on social media. If he's then using using Facebook as a way to communicate government information, does that violate the First Amendment rights of citizens to have themselves blocked off the president's Twitter account? So even something like Twitter that might be a private forum in most regards, a government official can make a private forum into some sort of a public forum by using it to communicate government information. There's actually a case this term before the Supreme Court called O'Connor-Ratcliffe. It's Ratcliffe, O'Connor-Ratcliffe versus Garnier, Garnier, which discusses this issue. It was a school board member who blocked constituents on Facebook and Twitter, and they couldn't see his messages. Does that then violate their free speech rights? Can a government official turn Facebook and Twitter into public forums? It's actually a very hard question. Is there state action when a government official blocks someone on social media? So that's actually a case pending this term as well. So this term, we have both the NetChoice case I gave to you in your reading and the social media case I just mentioned. So there actually are a lot of very thorny questions about how you characterize electronic fora as public or private forums. When I say fora, F-O-R-A, that's actually the plural forums, but no one ever says that. They say forums. Anyway, everyone with me? All right, the sixth lens I want to talk about is the TPM, the time, place, and manner restrictions. And this is kind of the government's fail-safe, right? They always want to say, we're not regulating what you can say. We're just regulating when you could say it, the time, where you can say it, the place, and how you can say it, the manner, right? So, for example, the when. If you want to have a parade, that's fine. But you can't have it at 3 in the morning because people are sleeping. Okay, that makes sense. The where. All right, you want to have a parade, we'll designate certain streets for the parade. You can't walk through anywhere. All right, that seems fair. The manner. This is where things get tricky. So the classic example is amplification. If you want to have a protest or a rally, you can speak, but you can't go over a certain decibel level. Okay, that sounds fair. In rock against racism, you have to use a government sound equipment so it doesn't sound like garbage, right? The court said that's under manner. That's fair also. Why? Because it's viewpoint neutral. You're not telling people what they can say or how they can say it. They're saying when, where, and how, not the what. Okay? But there's a rub. Sometimes conveying a message at certain times is very important, right? If you're protesting some government office and you want to get there right when they open first thing in the morning, that's what you're doing. You want to be there at that time. And let's say you want to protest the White House and demonstrate that you're opposing the White House's views on homelessness. The only place for that message to work would be outside of the White House. And in the Rock Against Racism case, they said the way we communicate our message is by really loud music. And by the government telling us you can only have a certain number of decibels with your crappy government speakers, right? That impedes our message. For our message is the beauty of music. I don't understand any of this stuff, but that's the argument, that music is beauty and it's message, and you need to hear it so that your eardrums are throbbing, and that's what makes the message work, right? I don't like concerts. Not interested. We'll go to rodeo soon. I got rodeo tickets. All right. I go for the rodeo event. I leave after that. All right. What else? I went many years ago. I did not enjoy it. Okay.
The rodeo part?
Yeah, that part I like. Right, I leave when the lights go down. That's good. All right. What else? Questions so far? Everyone get these 6 things. We're not going to come back to these again. Not again. Good? Good? Yes.
Are you
Good.
going to talk about state action later, like in the case that addresses state action, or not really?
Which case you make?
I guess it's Cohen.
Yeah, I'll talk about state action.
Okay.
I mean, we actually mentioned it before. I'll mention it again if you'd like. I'll come back to you, Cody. I'll ask you the question. In the defamation case, Sullivan, what was the state action? New York Times against Sullivan.
It was like the enforcement of the court's enforcement of
Correct.
the holding, right?
The libel law.
Right.
Right. So the way that state action, I mean, a lot of these cases don't involve the government, right? And Cohen is an example that you mentioned, Branzburg also. Where is there state action, right? Where does the First Amendment even come into play? Because a litigant is basically asking the court to enforce a law that burdens someone's free speech rights. That's the state action. It's always the same exact way. So, for example, the enforcement of the contract law, right? The promissory estoppel. That itself would be the state action.
So does that pretty much just turn any private action into state action if it's dealing with?
If you're asking to burn speech, yeah, kind of. I mean, Branzburg's, I guess, a little bit different because it involves a grand jury subpoena, and they were challenging the enforcement of a grand jury subpoena. So I think the state action there is a little bit clearer. But in Cohen, you're right; it's not entirely clear why there's state action. Red line, the state action's clear. Tornillo again, yeah, because they were seeking to enforce the right to reply law, and the court said that enforcing the public reply law would violate the First Amendment. So yeah, it's Cohen and Tornillo are both state action in that regard. You're right. Yeah, I guess you think of it this way: like Chaplinsky is an obvious case where there's a prosecution, so you know where the government action is. But in all their cases, it's going to be two private parties suing each other, and then they invoke the state action doctrine as a defense. Make sense? Okay. So today we're starting a new topic, which we only spend one day on, but it's important. The First Amendment, which we've read 100 times, says no Congress should make no law, ... except for the religious stuff for now, abridging the freedom of speech, comma, or of the press. The freedom of speech or of the press, and you can just put the word freedom in there. So freedom of the press. That's sort of what the of is referring back to. Freedom of the press. The press, not the press, the press, right? Jonathan, what does the press mean? The press. Samuel Jackson. Who's this? I don't know. But the press. What's a press?
Traditional journalistic.
But what does a press literally refer to?
A printing press.
Everyone had a printing presses, right? Gutenberg, right? It was an old machine, a thing, boom, boom, boom. With these little removable type, you can put letters on a page, right? So a press referred to a device that was used to print the printed word. Is that what we're talking about, Jonathan? Just the Gutenberg press?
No, it's more than that.
Well, how do you know that?
Press.
Well, what's more? Tell me more.
People that use that press to convey messages, or the derivatives of that press to convey messages.
Okay, so Anna, let me ask you the follow-up. How does the press then differ from the one that comes before it that says freedom of speech, comma, or of the press? How does press differ from freedom of speech?
I think like freedom of speech is expressive. And press sometimes, like they're just relaying this.
That only certain people become the press?
Well, I guess in the olden days it was easier to work for a company. Now
When the Constitution was ratified, were there journalists and newspapers? Who was doing the printing? Who was doing the press?
I think there were newspaper companies.
Oh, there were, but were there other people who took advantage of the press?
Well, I guess the government did by making these laws from the first started.
What do you mean?
Which press is more along the lines of publication and even movie Twitters.
So you're saying speech is oral, but press is written. So if I write a book, I'm only covered from press.
I think it's.
Remember Alito asked, can you ban books? From that question? Ooh.
Like publication and distribution should also be like, televised.
All right, so Adi, let me ask this question. The Federalist Papers, right? The famous Federalist Papers, we've all read them, right? They were published by Madison, Jay, and Hamilton. Were they the press? They were, Patrick Henry, Give Me Liberty, Give Me Death, pamphlets, right? Were they press? The Kentucky Virginia resolutions, were those press? Pamphlets.
Yeah. If it's pamphlets, yeah.
But they weren't journalists, they were politicians who just want to express their opinions. What is press?
What is the case that we just read that was like, well, anything can become press if we, or like I don't see, I mean, I think press could be a lot of the same things that speech is, because speech is done.
So they're listed separately. So that suggests they have different meanings. What's the difference between press and speech? Nick, want to take a stab?
I think that press is like a subcategory of speech.
Press is a subcategory of speech. Okay, that's it. What do you mean by that?
It deals with issues relating to public concern.
So if I will be a journalist about, crocheting or something obscure.
It's still like something.
If someone crochets, I'm sorry, pick something. Do you crochet? I'm sorry, that was mean. I saw someone crocheting recently. It was on my mind. Okay, I'm sorry. That's okay. I respect crocheting. My daughter's a beautiful crochet blanket. It's very nice thing to have. All right, Nick, I'm sorry. That was a detour.
Well, public, I guess, not necessarily like public concern, but.
Well, I'll make an easier example. Let's say it's a skinhead magazine. Make it real. It should go from crocheting to Nazis, right? Is that press?
I would say, but if it's like a magazine.
Yeah, White Supremacist Monthly.
No, I think that's just.
That's not
like
press?
A broader category of speech. I don't think
Okay, so you're saying that okay, now okay, I just want to push on this one bit. So who has to decide what's in the public interest, public discourse? Is there a white supremacist nationally monthly? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not subscribing. Cody, what do you think? Speech and press, and what do you think?
Whenever I think of press, like my understanding, it's just like the mass production of communication to the public.
Mass communication of what to the public?
Just like any topic,
But how's it different? So speech one-to-one versus press is broader?
It's not that, I mean, I don't know why they broke it up here, because my understanding is the press is a form of speech.
Press, so you subset. This is what Nick said a minute ago. All right, Shmur.
I think the word "for" means. I think the word "for" means the two words are interchangeable.
That's a good guess. If they're interchangeable, why list them separately?
Because sometimes the rule you might want to consider if it's something that has to be verbal or.
Okay, so this goes back to I think what Amy said a minute ago, that speech is word spoken versus press is printed.
Usually.
Dylan, does the press refer to anything special that, I'll use the word journalist or reporters? There were newspapers, to Anna's point a minute ago. Newspapers existed in the 1700s. They've existed for a lot longer than that. Do newspapers get some sort of special or additional protections that us regular folk may not?
Yeah.
Then why are the press listed out separately?
Maybe it's like just reaffirming that commercially they're going to be afforded the same protection. That's what press means in my mind. It's like speech would be an individual, and press would be commercial.
But there were no companies back then. We read this from Citizens United, right? Newspapers were just a random member of the community who had a little machine went like this. Ooh. All right. Anyone else want to ask something?
Well, does it have to do with the information, how it was, where speech is more like, I guess, an individual idea, whereas press, it's getting information from like an external source, and then.
Yeah, but you could be an editorial writer and you could make your own information, right? In a newspaper. No one else want to add something in this question? Don't worry, Shania, you're not going off the hook. I'll get you in a minute for another question. Anyone else want to do this one? Yeah, Julianne. Another word crocheting. I'm sorry.
Practice as like a subcategory of speech. I think it's important to have both, to emphasize that both are important, that it's not just.
So they're not interchangeable to what Jamar said a minute ago. There might be some difference.
There may be a difference, but even if they are similarly related topics, it's important to emphasize both categories.
All right. Anyone else on this question? So very good. You all, I think, hit a lot of the points with my leading questions along the way. The Supreme Court has more or less said that the press is not special. To Jamar's point, that whatever protections the people have, the press has. They're the same. And I'll get to whether that's right or wrong in a minute, but as a practical consequence, it means the press clause doesn't really give you anything extra, right? And I think the readings today sort of reflect that, right? In other words, they say, yeah, the media is important, but you're not special, right? You don't get additional protections that other, regular folk do not get. If that's correct as an original matter, I doubt it. I mean, usually when you list words separately, they have different meanings. So to Jamar's point, the word "or" in my mind would be different than "and" if it was, speech freedom, a speech and press. That would suggest they feel like I'm a unit; they're combined. But if you look at speech, comma, or of the press, I think they're two distinct bodies. And there's a good argument that when the framers wrote this, they knew what the press was. This was the media that printed newspapers and pamphlets and the like. And that was perhaps something different than spoken word. This is, and what Amy for the people said. I mean, it's not crazy, but if you were in the 1790s, there was no recording, right? There was no TV. The way you would communicate a message across large distances was through a printing press. I mean, I could come up to you and say some words to you. That's speech, right? I mean, I can write with my hand, I suppose. But if you want to actually reproduce it, it was with the printing press. So this is an area that sort of frustrates me as an originalist because the court just doesn't care, right? They've made no effort to actually grapple with the actual words used in the Constitution, just like it doesn't matter. So under doctrine we have today, speech, press, potato, potato, tomato, tomato means all the same thing. All right? Good? Good. Okay. So the first, excuse me, the first two cases that I want to cover today involve whether the press can get sort of exemptions from a generally applicable law. A generally applicable law. You saw this phrase, I think, in both of your readings today, Branzburg and Cohen. I'm sorry, Cohen. It's Cohen versus Cowles. They inverted it. Shania, help me out here. What does this phrase mean, a generally applicable law? What does that mean?
It means that the law applies to everyone and it's not targeting the press.
Perfect answer. Exactly. Perfect answer. Thank you. You can imagine a law, and this is a real case, where the government says, we're going to impose a tax on newspaper ink or newspaper printing press paper, right? The only people who will be subject to that law will be newspapers because they use newspaper ink or newspaper printing press paper. That would not be a generally applicable law because it's targeting the newspaper. This was actually a case where they tried to retaliate against the newspaper by imposing a tax on them. Governments do that kind of thing, right? But the laws in our two cases today, Branzburg and Cohen, are not targeting the new media. Is a promissory estoppel doctrine targeting the press? No, you guys learn about this in contracts, right? This is black letter, literally black letter contract law, right? Is the grand jury process of issuing subpoenas, is that targeting the press? No. It just happened to be that in this case, the recipient of the subpoena was a reporter. So what makes both Branzburg and I think Cohen sort of easier cases is that they're not targeting the press. If there was a law targeting the press, these are harder cases. All right. So Kevin, do you want to start me off, please, with the facts in Branzburg, the Kentucky one? Thank you.
So,
Journal. Where I clerked, the headquarters were across the street from the Courier Journal. I clerked in Louisville. Not important. You don't care.
Published a story about two people who were making H.
It's marijuana, yeah.
Marijuana.
Yeah, it's funny the way they spelled the H. It's probably every time it's like, well, that can't be right. They spelled it with an H. Anyway.
That's immediately start thinking for
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
They published a story about two people who were making hash oil with a photograph of their hands.
Right.
The
So you just, I'll come back to you. So just imagine you have a newspaper article and they deliberately photographed only the hands making the drugs, so you can't see their faces. So Kevin, what do you think the police did when they picked up a copy of that newspaper and saw this photo? What do you think they would think? Huh? What are we going to do about this?
well, we can find out who these are. We
Whose
know
hands those are,
all
right?
the evidence we need.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Kevin, let me just pause you for a moment. When the drug manufacturers allow it to be photographed, what kind of conditions do they put on that, photography session?
If they have any brains, it would be confidentiality.
Okay, so they said to the reporter, "We'll let you take pictures of us if you keep our identities confidential," right?
At the very least, yeah.
Do you think that was a smart thing for these druggies to do? Maybe they were high at the time. I don't know. The judge I clerk for would always say the reason why criminals are in jails are not very smart. If they were smart, they wouldn't do stuff like this, right? So these criminals, perhaps, reporters can be very persuasive. Oh, I promise I will guard your identity with my life, confidentiality, First Amendment. Yeah, I'm sure you can match this conversation. All right, so Eric, I'll come to you now. So they let themselves get photographed with their hands, and then the journalist wrote the story about how drugs are being manufactured in Louisville. Okay, what happens next?
Obviously, the police bring a complaint forward.
Oh yeah, they did. Yeah.
For grand jury.
Yeah.
The grand jury subpoenas Branzburg.
The reporter. Yeah.
And then Branzburg refuses to comply with
He refuses.
the jury subpoena,
He
so
does.
they take it to district court judge order sent to comply. And I think he obviously again refuses
Right.
and gets up consent.
Right. And just what's contempt mean? I'll come back to it. What does contempt mean? Tell me first. I'll give my story in a second.
From my understanding, is when you don't comply with a court.
Exactly. And what are the consequences of failing to comply with a court order?
In this case, it was jail.
You go to jail. You get a fine. This is criminal contempt. This is not civil contempt, right? You go to jail. And this has happened. The court can hold you in jail until you testify. There have been reporters who spent, what was her name? Her name was Judith Miller. How long? She was a New York Times reporter. She was in the prison in the mid-2000s during the Bush administration. How long was she in jail for? How was she in jail? Oh, she died. Oh, she's still alive. She's old now. Yeah, she was in contempt. Yeah, I think she was in contempt for about a year. 18 months. Yeah, yeah. I remember. I was in college when this happened. I'm old. But yeah, reporters can be in jail for a long time to keep their sources confidential. Eventually, I think she got out. They said it wasn't worth it. But yeah, so Eric's right. Now, I was going to say, do any of you ever want to be held in contempt? Unless you really need to. So I'll just, this is true. There might be times where you have a judge who is behaving poorly, and he's going to do something that will be very, very bad to your client. Let's be very carefully. You have to know for a fact the judge is breaking the law, and he's doing something bad to your client. And you might say, Your Honor, you are behaving inappropriately, that you're not doing the right thing. You say, Counselor, I'm going to hold you in contempt. And you might say, Go ahead. Why? Because it gives you an opportunity to challenge his ruling. So the question is, do you want to go to jail for your client? I'm serious. I'm not telling you to do this, but there are times where the judge might be doing something that's very bad, and for you to make a point, you might be willing to go to jail for contempt. Now, the first rule of being a lawyer and a police officer is come home to your family at night. It's true, right? You don't want to go to jail. Let your client go to jail, but you don't go to jail. But there might become a time in your career where you think, maybe I can make a scene here. It might be worth it. Now, you better be damn sure, because being held in contempt is bad. There might be a bar complaint that follows, right? There might be a criminal penalty. You might have to pay a fine. You might have to go to jail for a little bit. But just keep that in mind. I've never been held in contempt, not yet. sure remember the Supreme Court hold me in contempt, but they not theirs, they can't. Suckers, right? All right. So so this case goes to the Supreme Court, and the question is, does the First Amendment give the press an exemption from the subpoena law? Right? The subpoena law is generally applicable, it applies generally, but does the First Amendment allow you to basically ignore a lawfully enforced subpoena? Okay. Now, the opinion was written by Justice Byron White. White was a remarkable person. You've probably read some of his decisions in common law. Just to get this, he graduated from college in 1937. He played college football, basketball, and baseball. He won the Heisman Trophy. Okay. He was selected in the first round NFL draft. As a rookie, he led the league in rushing. Then the next year, he was admitted to Yale Law School. But he didn't go. Instead, he went to go World War I for 2 years. And when he got out of the war, he went to Yale Law School and he clerked for the Chief Justice. And then at the age of 45, he was appointed to the Supreme Court. Remarkable human being, Justice White. Just whatever you care about his case, his opinions are hard to read. I know he has these long sentences that stretch out, right? They stretch forever. I hate it. I can't say how he writes, but he was a remarkable human being. And who clerked for him? Justice Gorsuch. And anyway, he's two Coloradans. Anyway. So, okay, Jamar, I think you're next. So does requiring the reporters to testify for the grand jury violate the First Amendment?
No.
Okay, tell me why, please.
Because the public of the newspaper has to know. Publishers have the same rights. They can't do. If they're not above the law, they can't come to a grand jury and testify for the source.
Okay, good. So there's a couple arguments in Jamar's, a couple answers Jamar gave me. I just want to sort of tease them out. The first is the court says is the press ain't special, right? There's nothing unique about the press. The fact that Mr. Branzburg is a reporter doesn't matter, right? If a random Joe citizen on the street can't ignore a subpoena, then the reporter can't ignore the subpoena. But let's put aside the fact that he's a reporter. Does the First Amendment in general create an exemption for ignoring the subpoena? So, Aaron, just play devil's advocate for a moment. What's the argument that the First Amendment might justify an exemption from testifying? Why might, as a society, we would want reporters to sort of maintain this confidentiality?
I thought that was
Oh, really?
I just think that giving reporters carte blanche to say, oh, nope, it's confidential, I agree with the court that it would result in reporters being called into criminal investigations all the time.
But what's the benefit of allowing the press to sort of dig and in other words, is society better off having this article published with these guys' hands and knowing that drugs being manufactured in their backyard? Is that something that we should know about, or is that maybe we shouldn't?
I don't particularly believe that's super important.
Okay.
That's not a.
Play devil's advocate. Tell me why it would be important if you think the other position.
I guess if you lived in that neighborhood and it was a high crime neighborhood, some general idea of the location, then would maybe try not to live there.
Okay, sure. I mean, that's maybe one way of looking at it. Julianne, you want to try the question? Why is it important for the press to have this sort of ability to make these confidential arrangements? Ah. And why is getting that information important for society? Who gets to decide what's important to society? In particular,
In particular, the people who live in that area.
and the people who do what? Who write about it. So right. So why does the press or even speakers in general want to have this sort of protection because it allows them to do their job, right? Very often, the press gain access to information that may not be widely known because it might be embarrassing, it might get people in trouble. And the press has an obligation to share this information with the world. And so the argument is in order to ensure the press can sort of dig through the underbelly of society and go where people don't usually go, they need to have this confidentiality. I mean, in both this case, Branzburg, and the next case, Cohen, reporters tried to make some sort of deal. If you're a bad guy, you should know those deals are not upheld. Right? The court says that journalists, to gather news, need to agree not to identify their sources. And the court agrees if the force to reveal their sources, it would deter further sources from coming forward. In other words, after this case, would anyone call Mr. Branzburg with the confidential information? They probably don't read the Supreme Court case, so they would, right? But in theory, at least, right, they might not. And the court acknowledges that there's going to be a detriment to the First Amendment. But is there, right, Ryan? Does this ruling actually prevent publication of news?
Not technically, no. They haven't restricted the news from publishing anything from, I can't remember the exact word they used, but
There's no what? Well, what? There's no blank. Fill in the blank. What the government's not done? What's that thing that government you can never do?
No restraint.
Yeah, that's it. No prior restraint. Exactly. There's no. Why is there no prior restraint? Did anyone stop Louisville Journal from publishing this article?
No.
There's no prior restraint. And under our doctrine, we learned this the first week. You can punish someone after the fact for engaging in speech. You can't stop them at the outset, right? So there's no prior restraint to speech, no punishment. The government's not even trying to, punish the journalist for, being in the presence of drug paraphernalia, right? It's not really a conspiracy. I'm not sure what you would call it, but if you're around drugs, that might be a crime also. There's no affirmative duty to report to the police. You don't have that in our legal system, but they've not tried to punish reporters at all. Punishment would only flow if they fail to disclose information. Okay. But the court says no, there's no special immunity for the press. The First Amendment does not require every subpoena to be it to be rejected, even if there's a burden on the press. So the mere burden on the press is enough. That's not enough. There's no immunity. Okay. What about the argument that, maybe in future stories there won't be, criminals talking to the press? The court says, too bad. We don't care. This is not something that's of concern right now. Okay. Now, the court acknowledges that you might have a subpoena that's harassing. In other words, you can imagine a newspaper that runs a series of stories about a corrupt police department. And wouldn't you know it, the police keeps issuing subpoenas to these newspapers to try and get them to testify that stuff, that there's nothing really there. If there's evidence of harassment, they can deal with that. Those facts are not present here. The courts always supervise grand jury proceedings. Okay. So in the end, the court says the reporter does not get an exemption from the subpoena. He has to testify. Okay. Questions on Branzburg?
I wonder if they ever caught the drug dealer.
I was thinking about that. Probably. I mean, the journalists knew their identity. It wasn't a secret. So I guess once they get the guy's name, they can bust him.
I feel like if there's done enough to get their prime photograph for the newspaper, they're probably definitely get caught.
I mean, why would they do that though? Maybe they were paid. I've actually thought about this question for years. I don't know.
Unless they were like trying to show that they run that territory.
Yeah, that's plausible. Maybe they're trying to intimidate people from not crowding the market. Yeah, I don't know. Again, criminals who get caught are not that smart for a reason. I mean, they were smart, they wouldn't do this. I mean, but look, I mean, you've had famous drug lords like Pablo Escobar who would invite people to his factories. He would just be showing off and flaunting his wealth. So it happens. And it's not like Clarence Brandenburg who invited the cameraman to his Klan rally, right? He wanted to be caught. He wanted people to see it. This I don't see it. It's funny though. On the making of drugs, you actually have the Church of Marijuana who argue that marijuana is a religious right, and that's their sacrament. They have to take it. It comes up a lot. So you actually people argue that making marijuana and is actually part of their religious beliefs. Everything's religion. You're not impressed. All right. Any other questions in Branzburg? We move on. All right, Leighton. Can you please give me the facts? Our next case, also by Justice White, Cohen versus Cowles Media Company from Minnesota.
Yeah, so Cohen was basically working on a gubernatorial campaign in Minnesota and basically made a deal with one of the local newspapers to provide documents to them, basically to get dirt on in exchange for remaining anonymous in their articles.
Hmm?
And basically the newspaper said, oh yeah, we're not going to follow that. We're going to just remain tied into an expired. That's something.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. So this is another case where you have a guy coming to the press and saying, I got some juicy info for you. Right? This guy, Dan Cohen. And Lane, what exactly was the information he was trying to give to the press? What was he? Who's he trying to dump dirt on? Again, the Cohen was Republican. Who's he trying to dump dirt on?
It was for the candidates campaign.
Yeah, but what was the dirt? Jonathan, you had it? Well, he got the dirt. Ryan, I'll come back to you.
He was trying to show that the other candidates have been charged with unlawful assembly and one of them with petty theft.
Yeah, so in the days before Lexus, where you could just, search one's criminal history on the fly, he had the dirt, right? And he goes to the police. Julian's laughing, right? He goes to the cops with charges that the Democratic candidate for the office had been arrested, charged with petty theft. Now, it turns out these were pretty minor things. One of them, she said she stole like $6 of sewing equipment, and she, was mostly distraught, and the conviction was tossed. The other one, she was trying to protest to failure to hire minority workers. So I mean, this is some pretty thin gruel, but this is a hit job, right? This is what politicians do. They go to the press, they leak information, and what happened is that they promised confidentiality. Then the reporters found out this was kind of BS, right? This was not real dirt. And so instead of making it a story about the Democratic candidate, it backfired because they made the story about who? Cohen. That a Republican was trying to harm the Democratic candidate. Everyone just get the facts what happened. This is often the risk where you leak so-called dirt and it turns out it actually is worse for you. Over the years, I've gotten stuff people say, Josh, can you write about this? I'm like, oh, I ain't touching that because I knew it would probably blow up more in the person's face. Right? When someone says they have something for you that's very private and secret that only you can have, be very cautious. If they're giving it to you, so shady, why? Right? But why aren't they doing it openly? Why is this not being released as a campaign ad, right? Why are they trying to give it to the press quietly? All right. So again, yes, Adi.
This is kind of it's like not related to the outcome. If there are two public court records, like why was it dirt?
It's not.
It's like a public record.
It's a matter of public record. I don't know if they were expunged, which doesn't look like it. Maybe they were expunged records. I don't know, but the journalists obviously didn't do the due diligence. They didn't care. Right. Yeah, that was the one that's sewing. So it was. I don't know if it was still available. Expunge is probably the wrong word, but yeah, Julianne's right. Very often under the law, if you commit a minor offense, after a certain period of probation, it's wiped out. So it's possible they were not easily findable. But this opposition research guy, he found it. Today we're all screwed. Everything's online. Nothing's in. Even juvie records, people can find them. All right. So again, what did Cohen do? Right. So dude lost his job. Again, he was probably authorized to do this by his employer, and he got thrown under the bus. He got fired. He sued the reporters for basically breach of contract. So this was a question I think that Cody asked me a few minutes ago. What the heck is a state action? He's trying to enforce a contracts claim, and the argument is the contracts claim would violate the First Amendment. State contract law is under the Constitution, right? So you have to see whether the state contract law promissory estoppel violates it. So again, there was not a written contract, but he claimed promissory estoppel, which who loves contracts? What's what promissory estoppel is? Julianne, help us. I forgot. I took contracts a long time ago. I hate my colleague Randy. He teaches contracts. I don't.
Promissory estoppel is something where somebody actually induce reliance
Perfect.
on that promise.
Right. So in other words, the reporter said, "We will promise you confidentiality." That induced reliance by Mr. Cohen, and that reliance, Cohen gave him the dirt, the information. And he's saying this basically was a contract that I'm giving this dirt on the condition that you keep it confidential. Now, this is not a case where the reporters were protecting their source. It's actually the opposite, right? In the Branzburg case, the Branzburgers were protecting the drug dealer, right? He was protecting this guy. Here, it's the opposite. They threw him under the bus. They said, "Here, Mr. Cohen came to us and gave us this garbage information," right? So really, the argument is not here that the press is keeping their source. If the press doesn't keep their source, they did not keep their promise. So in some ways, it's like the mirror image of what happened in Branzburg. So the question then is whether promissory estoppel law can be blocked. So in the abstract, I know, Julianne, you know contracts. Forget the First Amendment. Would promissory estoppel, you think, apply here, or just failing the Constitution? What do you explain more? Again, I don't remember contracts. So you think Mr. Cohen would not be reasonable to rely on this promise from reporters? Because the reporters were hustling him? Is that the argument?
I think if you really want to remain confidential, there are other ways to go about getting that reasonable reliance.
What would you do? I don't know.
Like not go meet them myself.
Put in like a Dropbox somewhere? Deep throat, like meet them in a garage somewhere? Put a letter in the mailbox with magazine letters cut out?
I think like press remain out of the story might be reasonable if you have
So I wonder though, just to dwell on this point, I wonder if in the past there have been similar arrangements made. Because reporters often will get information from political sources with the expectation it's private. Here the guy screwed up apparently. I don't know. It's okay, but thank you, Joanna. Your contract law is saving us this evening. So again, is there state action, Cody? Yes, there is. There's a state's enforcing a contract law. Is this a law of general applicability? Who am I up to? Jonathan. Is promissory estoppel a law of general applicability? What does general applicability mean?
Law applies to everyone.
Yeah. So is the promissory estoppel law a law of general applicability?
Yes.
It is. So we're not talking about some sort of viewpoint discrimination. There's no content discrimination. This law applies across the board. And the rule is that generally applicable laws don't violate the First Amendment. Okay? All right? And here the court invokes Branzburg. Subpoena law, generally applicable. Promissory estoppel, generally applicable. And there's no special immunity from these generally applicable laws. Okay? Anna, would enforcing this law, would allowing Cohen to bring this suit inhibit truthful reporting?
I guess yes, because then maybe they would be worried about being sued.
So what's actual holding in this case, though? Can the promissory estoppel be enforced?
They said
Oh, no, they couldn't be enforced.
Again, did the First Amendment block the enforcement of promissory estoppel?
Oh, sorry, no, the First Amendment does not forbid its
So
application.
can Mr. Cohen raise his estoppel claim?
He can't.
He can. So in other words, the press does not get an exemption from promissory estoppel. If I mean, maybe Julianne's right. Maybe there's no valid promissory estoppel claim, but that's separate. He can raise it. Why? Because the press doesn't get around contracts law because there's no special protection for the press. Again, the press wanted an exception for promissory estoppel. Okay? The press wanted an exception for promissory estoppel. They didn't get it. It's a generally applicable law.
I understand why the parent wants to raise the First Amendment thing here, just because they want to get out of the lawsuit.
Right.
But doesn't this ruling actually promote more free speech by protecting informants?
Well, what's interesting here is the newspaper didn't want to protect their informant, but in the abstract, yes, right? So let's say that this was not Minnesota. Let's say this was Kentucky, and a reporter saw the guy making hashish, and they said, "We want to publish your name in the newspaper." He says, "Wait a minute, you made a promise, promissory estoppel." So I think this could be used by confidential informants to keep their names out of the paper. So in some regards, this does promote more speech. But let me ask you a flip side. You think newspapers want to be sued?
No, yeah, no one wants to be sued.
Do you think newspapers would be willing to make deals with informants with the risk that they might be sued?
I just think it makes them more careful.
Ooh, careful. That means cautious, right? So here's what reporters want. They want the luxury of making the promise, knowing they're not stuck by it. In other words, they want the benefit of promising the world and delivering nothing. They want to say, "Oh, we'll keep your name secret. We promise." And then if they find some other motive, okay, we'll put his name in the newspaper, right? So what this decision does, you're right, it forced them to keep their word. And they don't want to do that. They don't want to be keeping their word. They want at least the flexibility to say, "Oh, we'll make this promise." So, like I've written books before, right? And I've talked to people and I said, "Is this on the record or off the record?" They say, "Oh, this is on the record," and they tell me all this stuff. And they call them a week later and say, "Okay, you told me this was on the record." "No, that's on the record." "Oh, I didn't say that," and I have it on tape, right? Reporters will want to say, "Oh, so it's on the record," right? They want the flexibility to use it or not. So even if they promise you confidentially at the outset, they might want to back off it later, depending on what you tell them. So you're right that it promotes more confidential informants. It also creates the risk that they make less of these deals because they're willing to getting sued because there's damage that can arise. Now, maybe Julianne's right. Maybe under state law, it's not reasonable to rely on. Maybe there's a public policy exception also because we're talking about illegal activity, perhaps. I don't know. Especially in the hashish one, right? You're basically asking someone to keep your identity. You're making drugs. There's got to be a public policy exception to something like that.
Like the last part of promissory estoppel is if justice was required.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
And I feel like
Yeah, I mean, with the old criminal convictions, there's not really a public policy exception. It's a matter of public record, mostly, kind of. Okay. But anyway, the bottom line of the Cohen case is the promissory estoppel, the contract law, could be applied because the First Amendment said nothing about it, right? This was a generally applicable law. It was not targeting the press. Be enforced. Okay. Weird case too. These two cases don't really cite, they cite each other, but they're kind of like mirror images of each other. Okay. All right. Good on Cohen. All right. Let us do. Oh, and Justice Blackmun had this. I'm sorry, I skipped it. Justice Blackmun had dissent and said this case is not like Branzburg, and he would not have enforced this promise because he thought that it violates the free speech. All right. Next up, Red Lion. Who am I up to? You. Okay, Adi, you want me the facts in Red Lion, please?
Okay, so Red Line Broadcasting Company had this like with an affiliate called World for God, Christ, and the Bible.
WGCB.
Yes. And they had.
You know, every radio station has unique call signs, usually 4 letters, and that's how you can identify them anywhere in the country. All right, go on.
And they have broadcasts basically saying bad things about this guy, Argus. Yeah. Right? That's the one.
Well, Hargis was broadcasting. He was the Reverend.
Okay. Well, okay. There was someone else who didn't like it, basically. And
Cook.
yes, it was Cook.
Who was Cook criticizing?
Cook was criticizing.
The only person not hit was sticker on your laptop.
Wait, what?
The one who's you don't have a sticker of him on your laptop.
Oh, Barry Goldwater.
Goldwater, yeah.
Yeah.
Get every other conservative on. Yes. So right. So just to get this straight, Cook wrote a book that was critical of Goldwater, and Hargis was a Christian evangelist who was criticizing Cook. Everyone got the name straight? Okay. What happened next?
Okay, so because Cook felt he was attacked by guests on the radio show, like he ended up filing a complaint with the FCC. And so he said basically that you have to let me reply to the time or reply. He gave me 3 replies for the to reply to the broadcast because of the fairness doctrine.
You had some scorn in your voice when you said that.
Because it's weird.
What's the fairness doctrine?
It's like this thing where I think it's kind of confusing, but like if you say something bad about someone on the radio, you have to let them literally reply back. It's about having both sides of the debate aired.
You seem skeptical.
Because I can't believe it existed. It's so weird.
Oh, why is it so weird? It existed for decades.
Well, because they're literally forcing you to basically
force you to be careful.
Yeah.
Force you to be careful. You said a minute ago, right? All right. Thank you for that, Adi. So this actually still exists with TV, by the way. So I don't know if you remember during the last election, in 2016, Saturday Night Live actually made fun of Trump. And then Trump said, okay, I'm a candidate. I want my right to reply. And they had to give Trump a segment to himself in the next episode. So actually, SNL actually had Nikki Haley on their show a couple weeks ago. So just wait for it. Because they're required under law to allow Trump on the air. Good job. So it exists for broadcast TV, but does not exist for radio. The Fairness Doctrine was repealed in the late 80s and actually led to the proliferation of conservative talk radio because talk radio cannot exist if they have to give a right to reply because they'd be every 5 seconds giving a right to reply to someone. The Fairness Doctrine, I want to just dwell on this. I know Adi doesn't like it, but let's try to actually defend it. We're lawyers here, right? We'll try and defend it, right? Nick, help me out here. What's unique about radio? Why is radio sort of a very unique medium?
Because there's like a limited amount of radio waves or frequencies or the airtime.
Okay, so what Nick said is correct with the case. It's actually scientifically not correct. It's basically infinite spectrum. And when science, you're not shaking your head, yeah? Yeah, you just tell us, yeah. My right is basically unlimited.
Of wavelengths for frequency, but there's only so many that we can actually use with our technology.
There's a very, very large number, right?
Yeah, I think with AM and FM radio.
You don't need to use AM and FM, right? You use different bands.
You can, but I think that for at least as far as our technology is concerned, we can only use so much of it. It's a lot more now than before. Then obviously the wave or the distance that you project that, and then interference from other channels.
Right, but at least he's right. The government always exaggerates, but in theory, at least, spectrum's limited. We have a lot of spectrum today.
I think it's only like 5. Yeah.
No, it's a very large number. If you ever want to just, yeah, I mean, there's 3 stations on the air, right? But the government rations spectrum, and they make a very, very rigorous market. But let's just put aside. Let's assume the facts are what they are. So given that there's a limited number of radio stations in a given geographic area, that's what the court says. Broadcasting is not a right, it's a privilege, right? You can speak to people, right? You can talk to your neighbor. But if you want to be on the air with limited spectrum, it's a privilege. And with great power, as they say, comes great responsibility, right? And one of that responsibility is to provide a balanced perspective of society. And so when you're doing your programming, you have to make sure that you have a balanced approach, that you're not becoming an editorialist. And if you want to become an editorialist, that's fine. But if you attack someone, they can provide the balance, and you have to give them equal time. Now, the consequence of the fairness doctrine would be that people would just be afraid, cautious, use your words, to have any sort of controversial publication. Everything's just nice and happy. We just tell it like it is. There's no opinions. So talk radio, radio stations are pretty boring. Just nothing of interest. Howard Stern, Rush Limbaugh, they came of age after the fairness doctrine. They could not exist under this regime. Right? So let me give you the actual facts of this case. It's actually kind of sorted. Did Mr. Cook actually hear this broadcast? Was he in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, listening at this odd hour of night? No, of course not. At the time, the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, basically had a full-time person whose job was to listen to every radio station in the country. The people just listening to radio stations across the country and taking notes. Why? Because if they heard something critical of their people, they would then demand equal time for the sole purpose of making a fuss. And they would just file complaints to the government every time they heard these complaints. These are the facts. I'm not making this up. So Cook never actually heard himself. A DNC operation challenging right-wing broadcasters because he wrote down all the information. Okay? This was funded after JFK. It was a big deal back then. Okay? And they admitted the strategy was to basically harass right-wing broadcasters. This is the purpose of this enterprise. It's not like a mystery. Right? This is not the case. All right. So Cook files this complaint with the FCC. The lower courts uphold the FCC's position, and they say the fairness doctrine is constitutional. What's curious is that in the 1970s, free speech advocates favored the fairness doctrine. The ACLU favored the fairness doctrine. Cody, why do you think the ACLU favored the fairness doctrine?
Like your opportunity to be heard.
Yes, perfect. This guarantees free speech. So Adi was repulsed by this law, saying it's the opposite of free speech. But if you were in the 1970s and you were in a world with 2 TV stations and 3 radio stations in a city, this gave you your speech. There was no social media, right? There was no Twitter. If you had an idea, the only way you could speak to the masses was through a radio, TV, or newspaper. That's it. Those are your choices, maybe a magazine, right? But you have like a couple choices. So the ACLU said this guaranteed that the people can speak. Same with Tornillo. This guaranteed people could speak. It's the opposite of what you think today, right? It's the exact opposite. Today we think about, oh my God, the free speech rights of the broadcasters being infringed. Back then it was, who cares about the broadcasters? The people can speak. Who has the power to control the message? It's amazing how in 50 years, how everything's kind of just flipped from where it was. So Cody's correct. This was viewed as a way to promote free speech. That really comes through in the opinion. If you read the majority opinion, which again was by Justice White, lots of White cases today, it really comes through that we don't really care about the broadcasters think. They're exercising a privilege. They have a government monopoly. They're stuck with it, right? If you don't want to have a good free speech radio station, then get another line of work. Do something else. Print a newspaper or something, right? You don't need to do this. Not with our precious, right? Our precious spectrum, right? Feral's a Gallic, a precious spectrum, right? Lord of the Rings, you've heard of it? Okay. All right. All right. So, Dylan, you want to just walk me through Justice White's opinion, please?
Got it.
No, you do a little more.
He goes through the scientific stuff, like you said, and
Scientific stuff, yeah.
starts talking about this.
Good. What?
He says the government
Good.
Is the scarcity of radio frequency the government is committed for some licenses? Then he talked about like how like balancing the different perspectives of free speech.
Does he care at all about the rights of Reverend Hargis, his free speech rights? Does that even come across as any relevance? The right of Reverend Hargis to criticize the Mr. Cook?
It looks like it's just having the opportunity to get having an equivalent opportunity.
Yeah, Shania, let me ask a question. Why do you think the court doesn't care about Reverend Hargis's ability to criticize Cook? Why is that not important? Doesn't he have free speech rights?
He does, and he's welcome to criticize whoever he wants, but at the same time, if you're gonna criticize, you're gonna have to give them an opportunity.
Good. Is there a prior restraint here, Shania? Did anyone stop Mr. Hargis from Reverend Hargis from criticizing Mr. Cook? What's the consequence, though, if he does make that criticism?
He doesn't have to give them airtime if he doesn't make the criticism.
All right, so let me try this one with Kevin, a related question. Kevin, if you know that, let's say you're on the air for 1 hour a week, right? Limited, you have 1 hour a week show. And you know that if you criticize someone for 20 minutes, say 30 minutes, right? You have to give 30 minutes to that guy in your show next week. Are you going to do that to your show? No. Do your sponsors want to hear 30 minutes of some other random dude complaining? No. Do your listeners want to hear this? No. So what are you going to do?
The easiest solution is just don't criticize.
Talk less, smile more. Right. But that doesn't play into the court decision at all. Right. The obvious import of this decision, as Shania said, is you're not going to criticize the guy because then you have to give away half your show. And let's say you criticize 5 people in a show, right? Turn on to any AM radio station. Instead of 10 minutes, I'll criticize 20 people, right? It's going to happen. There'll be no actual time to broadcast your show because immediately every other day of the week will be a response show. Sponsors won't pay for that. But the court just doesn't care because they're saying that if you want to use public airwaves, you don't have First Amendment rights. Right? Just I contrast that with a case like Citizens United. The idea they have the right to broadcast a movie critical of Hillary Clinton for the election with corporate money. And that's all they care about, right? The right of the speaker. But that just doesn't matter in 1971 when there's only 3 radio stations in it now. Is the right of the viewers and listeners, not the right of the broadcasters as paramount. The right of the viewers and listeners, not the right of the broadcaster. The First Amendment preserves a marketplace of ideas, but the public only receive what the government deems them appropriate to receive. Right? On this scarce resource, the government can decide we want fair and balanced news. The fairness doctrine, the court says, is not so bad. What about self-censorship? Well, that's their problem. If they decide not to have criticism there, they were better off for it. It was a gentler time back then. Right? I just wonder if I could just bring Justice White on Twitter and just show him for 5 minutes the sort of garbage people say about each other. But even fathom just watch, the Tucker Show on Twitter. Just for 2 minutes. Could he even just fathom? Like, what? I don't think you even see it. Anyway.
So this still is on like for TV?
Broadcast TV, yes. The fairness doctrine was repealed for broadcast radio, but still over-the-air TV. This is still in effect. No, broadcast is not cable. I'm sorry. Do you remember? Oh God. Remember there used to be antennas on TVs? That means over-the-air, but you don't. CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox, not Fox News, Fox Broadcast. Well, PBS, I don't know if PBS is considered broadcast TV. I think it probably is, but they don't do anything anyway. Well, public access was. Did you study Loretto in property? Loretto versus teleprompter, CATV. Remember where they installed the cables inside the building? It was a takings case. One of the key parts of the case was people needed access to cable in order to access public access television. You know what public access TV is? Wayne's World? No, right? I'm dating myself. Public access TV was basically a way that anyone can get on TV. Now, it'd be like at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, right? but they had airwaves that you could actually get on TV to do whatever garbage you wanted to put in the air, right? Public access TV was a basic way of having a right of reply. That's one of the reasons why cable licenses were granted, that they gave time on their airwaves for the public to speak. But public broadcast TV is basically the legacy affiliates, which is CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox, and maybe a couple others. That's why when NBC, which has a show called Saturday Night Live, which was popular at the time, gave a criticism of Trump, he invoked fair reply, and he was able to get on the air. So again, when that Nikki Haley go on the air criticize Trump, she's his candidate opponent, so Trump might get right reply also. All right. All right. Questions on Red Lion? Yes, Cody.
So are you trying to make the point?
Am I or is Justice White?
You,
Me.
I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to
I don't
pick
know.
out what you were alluding to.
Oh, what do I know?
That allowing them to have their equal time suppresses the original speaker's voice.
Right. So the argument that Red Lion raises, I don't know if I raise the argument, but Red Lion argued that giving equal time will have a predictable consequence. What's the predictable consequence? That to avoid having to give up airtime to someone else, you just won't criticize. And that would chill the ability to discuss public issues.
And like the court used the word speculative.
Yeah. Whenever the court says this, like, we don't know for sure. You're speculating. That's going to happen, right? The purpose of this enterprise was to suppress conservative talk radio. That's not like a mystery, but the court just sort of looks the other way because it's easier, right? Yeah, there's nothing in the record to prove that there's censorship, except for the guy saying, "You're going to censor me." That's what Hargis said.
With the that they're like naming this person by name.
That's a really good question. Let me give you an analogy. In New York's time against Sullivan, right, the libel case, did the commercial actually mention Mr. Sullivan? It sort of just referred to the Birmingham, or is it Montgomery, like, government, right? I would use a similar principle that if the communication can reasonably construed to refer to a person, that would trigger the right of reply. Like, if they said the leading Republican candidate for president, okay, we know what that is, right? So you don't have to name the person. I think it'd be close enough. All right. Adi, what do you think? Still don't like this case? No? That's okay. Anyone else? Anyone like this case? Curious.
I mean, like, yeah.
No? Oh, you can like that, but also like this case. Cody, you like this case?
Yeah, I think I feel like one side is saying, "Oh, they're both saying that I'm being censored."
Isn't that something, right? Yeah.
So it's like allowing the other person to have their time is like now we're just both equally at the risk of being censored.
And I asked you to do the reading on the NetChoice case. It's actually very closely related to this as well, because what Florida and Texas have tried to do to Facebook is what the FCC did to the radio station. They demand a right to reply, fair treatment. It's not exactly the same, but it's in the ballpark. All right, let's do Tornillo, Mermaid Herald. I can't move up to. Oh, Eric. Yeah, thank you, sir. All right, give me the facts, please, in Miami Herald versus Tornillo.
Herald print editorials are critical of Tornillo. So Tornillo demanded that the newspaper's print did respond to the editorials verbatim.
Yeah. So again, Tornillo was an official in the local teachers union. He went to jail for many years, among other things. But at the time, he was very upset that that the newspaper was criticizing him. So just Eric, just describe how the Florida law operated, just at a high level, please.
The statute is a right of reply statute, so it
Good.
provides that from not making a election to sale regarding his personal character or official record, he has the right to demand that the newspaper print their cost.
Very good. So for example, if they put 1,000-word op-ed or 1,000-word editorial criticizing. By the way, you know what op-ed stands for? Op-ed? It actually stands for opposite the editorial page. So you have an editorial page and an op-ed page. It's literally the opposite. That's what op-ed stands for. That's not opposition. It's the opposite of the editorial page. It's the other page. Anyway, not important. All right. So let's say the newspaper runs a 1,000-word editorial on, criticizing Mr. Tornillo. Then he gets a 1,000-word response. So I mean, the arguments here are somewhat similar to what was raised in Red Lion, that if you have this right of reply, it's going to chill speech, because who the hell wants to give up half their newspaper, half their editorial page to whoever you're criticizing? Every op-ed criticizes someone. I mean, that's why an editorial criticizes someone. That's the purpose of an editorial. Now, curiously, it doesn't apply to private citizens. The fairness doctrine applies to anyone. So anyone off the street who's criticized has reply. This only applies to government officials, people holding some or seeking some governmental office, which is curious. Why? Politicians like to protect themselves, and they want to make sure that if they're criticized, they can reply. But more precisely, this law is designed to chill criticism of politicians. It chills only them. Okay. I wonder if the Florida newspaper had sued the government saying that this law is a form of viewpoint discrimination, because it only requires certain types of replies, maybe facial and constitutional. I don't know. All right, so Jamar, excuse me, help me out here. So the newspaper refuses to print Mr. Tornillo's right of reply. He sues them for violating the statute. What happens?
The court denies it.
Okay, why?
The court denies it because newspaper time is expensive already.
Newspaper time?
Well, I guess newspaper spacing.
Columns, right? You all know newspapers are printed in columns. It's called column inches, right? I feel this class is making such a boomer, but but I'll come back to you, Jamar. But a newspaper was this thing. It was kind of like a book. You publish them every day, print on paper, and there were a certain number of columns. And let's say an editorial page had maybe 4 or 5 columns. Every column that you sacrificed for a reply meant you couldn't publish your own news of the day, your own editorials. All right, go on, sir.
So like you're saying, there's a finite amount of
Finite, yeah.
So what can you put into the newspaper at a certain time?
Mhm.
So they said that having to put in the other person's response limited their editorial process, and then it wasn't really their newspaper anymore.
But wait a minute. Airtime is only 24 hours a day on a radio station, right? And really, people listening for maybe 8 or 10 hours a day. No one's listening at 3 in the morning. Couldn't the same argument be made about a radio station? Only so much time in the day. Why are you occupying their limited broadcast time? Like the example of Kevin, if you have 30 minutes criticizing, 30 minutes reply, that's half your show. Why is it different than a radio station?
I think a radio station is different because of the audience that it reaches.
Why?
With the radio station, like let's say it's the one in Florida, it's probably local to that area.
People, you have a newspaper just for a small town. What difference does it make? Why is a radio station different than a newspaper? With the radio station, they. Oh, you're good. Right. So the answer is, with the radio station, it's a license, and you have your precious spectrum, right? A limited spectrum. But the newspaper, there's no license, I don't think, right? There's not a requirement to get a license to run a newspaper. And in theory, you can have as many newspapers as you want. Only limitation is how many trees you want to cut down, right? That's the only limitation. But let's just put aside the spectrum issue, right? Just forget about spectrum for a minute. Aaron, is there a difference between the number of hours a day on a radio station and the number of columns that exist in a newspaper? Is there actually a difference there?
The number of hours.
Hours that you can broadcast a day in a radio station, it's like 8 or 12 hours a day, and how many columns are on a newspaper?
I mean, there's a limitation like
There is. And isn't there an editorial judgment over what you put on the air and what you put in the paper?
Yes.
So is a radio and a newspaper much different?
Not in my view, no.
Yeah. Jamar? Go ahead.
Yeah,
go
I guess the difference is that the government regulates the radio or doesn't regulate.
That's the precious argument. That's the scarcity argument, right? But I said put that aside. Radio and newspaper seem very similar. So it's sort of, you have to sort of just bend a little bit to reconcile these cases. I think the way to reconcile them is based on the spectrum, right? The limited license argument. Because here the court is very concerned about the First Amendment rights of the newspapers. They don't give a lick about the First Amendment rights of the radio people, right? That doesn't matter. But the newspaper, they do think that that really does matter. Because at the time, the only broadcast where you had TV, radio, and newspaper. That's all you had. TV and radio were subject to the fairness doctrine. So the only way you could actually criticize someone was through newspapers. That was it. Because TV and radio triggered response times. So the court said, Florida, you can't require a response for newspapers, but feds, you can require a response for radio. Again, Florida, you cannot require a response for newspapers, but the feds can require a response for radio and for TV. That was it. The radio, TV, and newspaper. That's all you got. There was no social media. And they put a lot of focus on what they call editorial judgment, or what we call today curating, right? Curating is what people call it today. But that just means deciding what goes on your newspaper page. I mean, you always see this in the movies. You know, it's like, what's going on page 1? What's going on page 2? They sort of lay it out. They put little printing press things, right? They make a newspaper. Everyone here has read a newspaper, right? In person, actually held a newspaper in their hand. In 10 years, the answer might be no. I'll still be here. I'm serious. Look, this job is weird. I get older, you get the same age, right? My students are always roughly the same age. I just keep getting older. So eventually all my references get dated.
Can I tell a fun story?
Yeah.
when I used to, like, when I was in my internship in college for Congressman McCall, we would read the newspaper like every day to like see we had to like give them updates and stuff in the local newspapers. It's insane the things that they would report. Like I was like, oh my gosh, like they would be like, brother hits other brother with rock on the middle of the street, or it would be like, woman like won't talk to her husband. Like it was for like little local towns, or it was like someone fell the other day, like they're okay. Really funny.
All right. Okay. I'm glad. All right. Thank you. All right. Questions on Red Lion or on Tornillo? Yes, Julian?
I feel like it would have been a good argument to make the distinguishment between local cases because the Florida statute is specifically criticism of candidates.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned before, protectionism. So why is that problematic that only applies to certain types of criticism? You got it. Exactly right. It's either content-based or viewpoint-based. I'm not sure which one it is, but I think it's to be one of them. And again, it's only criticism. You can praise a government official. That doesn't trigger reply. But if you criticize it, that's not allowed. Well, this is sort of like the with McConnell v. FEC, right? I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Wrong case. This was like the there's actually a law on the books now that says if you ever want to use a living person's name in a trademark, you must get the permission. If you praise the person, you'll probably get it. But if you criticize it, you won't. There's no regards to viewpoint discrimination. All right. Any other questions on Red Lion or on Tornillo? All right. So I always try to bring at least one current case into my classes, and this year I focused on the NetChoice case. Has anyone been following this case? A part of our? Anyone even hear about it? That's all right. All right. So I'll just give the facts at a high level, then we can talk about it for a few minutes. It should come as no surprise that in recent years, social media companies have become very unpopular. I'm going to date myself. I was in college when Facebook was created. I'm actually the same age as Zuckerberg. We were actually contemporaries. I didn't know him, but we were in college around the same time. So I remember my junior year in college, I was like, oh, Josh, you have a Facebook page. I'm like, what the hell's Facebook? I didn't know what that was, right? And then initially it was just your picture. There was not really much information about it. This was in 2003 or 4, give or take. It actually launched campus by campus. So one campus would get it, college campus. Originally, you could only be friends with members, and you're in campus, and it spread broader. And then eventually they opened up to non-students with those terrible, why are you making non-students? And it's just a long time ago, 20 years ago. But in recent years, social media companies have been under siege. It's argued that they are being hostile to, in particular, conservative speech, that they are shadow banning, right? Where they basically depress your posts so they don't show up in algorithms, that they are censoring people, that they're shutting down certain perspectives. This became very prominent during COVID because anyone who had any sort of thoughts about vaccines were just blocked altogether. Okay? So Florida and Texas enacted legislation. The reading I gave you sort of summarized it, but I'll give you some of the highlights. These laws require an explanation if they take down your content. And they require these companies to comply with their own terms of service, and they can be sued if they don't. And if they shadow ban you or they sort of depress with their algorithms your content, you can also sue them. So it basically takes these social media companies and allows them to be sued for a lot of their judgments. The thinking here, though, is how to analogize a social media platform. So who here remembers what a common carrier is? Yeah, Cody?
I was like, I think it's like property common carrier.
Sure.
Like, public transportation, pipelines, car lines.
You're giving me examples, that's right, but what is a common carrier?
A use that the public is like allowed, everyone in the.
Is it run by a private entity or is it a public entity? Right, so the very definition of a common carrier or a public utility, right? It's going to be some sort of privately run entity. So the examples are railroads, telephone companies, telegraph companies, ferries, pipelines, you mentioned a few others, right? These are entities that have based something close to a government monopoly. In fact, the monopoly might be supported by the government, but as part of that monopoly, they're required to serve without that discrimination. Right now, one of the ironies, of course, is that railroads were segregated, right? So they didn't mean serve everyone literally, right? But they meant at least that they could have charged the same rates to people, that to publish their rates, and that they could not deny service to people on whatever basis. Florida and Texas have argued that Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snap have become such large conglomerates that they basically assume monopoly power. And that since they've assumed monopoly power, they should be treated as if they are social media companies. I'm sorry, they should be treated as if they're public common carriers. And if they are public common carriers, they are no different than the radio station Red Line. In other words, if they've assumed this sort of monopoly power, they can be regulated the same way the radio stations can. All right, now, what's the problem with that argument? Why might that argument not work? Why might Facebook not be like a radio station in Red Line? Anyone?
You have to make an account for it. You can't just access it. So.
Well, to get in a train, you have to buy a ticket. I mean, what's the big deal of making an account? Ryan?
Virtually anybody can create a social media platform.
Well, sure. If I make Ryan book tomorrow, how many people are going to join? No offense.
Probably zero, but still, it's like it's not like a train where you can't just lay it.
I don't know. What if Truth Social or Rumble gets really popular and takes off tomorrow?
Well, that's my point. That anybody can start a social media.
I mean, how old is TikTok? Did TikTok exist 4 or 5 years ago? It's pretty new.
Started in like 2017.
When did it blow up in the last couple of years, though, right?
Yeah, I think Vine died out in like 2016.
I use Vine. I'm old. Thank you.
Yeah, pandemic definitely. blew it up.
I'm afraid of TikTok. It scares me. Really? I don't follow any. So I will never check any of the social medias. I will never. I promise. I actually deleted my Facebook account 5 or 6 years ago. I don't use Twitter. Thankfully I'm off. But Julianne's right. Look, there have been platforms that have emerged in the last couple of years. I mean, what if tomorrow OpenAI makes a ChatGPT, social media platform and just takes off tomorrow? No one heard of ChatGPT more than a year ago, and now it's an $80 billion capitalization company. So, but the argument that you can't build a new one, that only goes so far. But my question is a little different. Why is it perhaps problematic to convey a social media company to a phone company? Why is that maybe not the right analogy? What do you do with a phone? Right? A telephone, not a smartphone, a telephone. What do? You make a phone call. Is there any discretion on the phone company? What happens when you dial a number? No, it routes the call. When you post stuff to Facebook, is there any guarantee your stuff stays up there? Why? Terms of service, right? In other words, Facebook and Twitter say, you might post whatever you want, but then we can decide afterwards that we're not going to keep it. And as a result, we're not just a dumb carrier of phone calls. We are a curator. Oh, there's that word. I said it before on purpose, right? We are curating content, and we want to convey a certain message. Facebook wants to curate only happy, loving, non-hateful speech, whatever it happens to be, right? Now, what's wrong with that argument?
My problem with that argument is like that's their subjective intent of their company, but it's not the objective understanding of the public and how the.
Does anyone think Facebook is actually curating a message? What do they? What is Facebook, Twitter? What is it?
On my Facebook is just a compilation of everyone I know just saying random stuff. There's no like actual message that I get from Facebook.
Okay, so here's the question, right? Go to our chart over here. What's the very first question I always want you to think about? Is Facebook.com, X.com, your Instagram app, right? Is that actually speech? And if it's speech, whose speech is it? Is the speech of you and your friends, or the speech of Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk?
I think it depends on what part of the app you're in.
What do you mean?
Well, like in the feed, if I'm just in like my friend's feed, I see all of their, and that's their individual speech. And if I'm in like the social part, like if I'm getting like advertisement or syndicated.
But again, is it Facebook speech or is it someone else's speech?
It depends, I guess. Use of the algorithm makes it Facebook speech.
Algorithm, Julianne?
I think it's more of a third party, but also platform itself. Not like the third party for either advertisers or other random people on the internet, influencers, and posting their own messages, but then by use of the algorithm for social media, it kind of tells us what gets put out.
You keep talking about this algorithm. What is this algorithm you speak of? Have we ever seen it? Do we know what this is?
So the algorithm on the platform is supposed to curate your feed in such a way that you're.
Is the curation by the algorithm itself speech? In other words, there's some app, some code somewhere that's saying put this here, put that there, put this there. Is the output of that algorithm putting all together on your social feed? Is that speech? Your very first question. Is data speech?
I feel like I kind of have to go back to some of the case law where algorithm. I don't know, the intent of the algorithm is because the messages and statements. And it's just to make sure that you are watching advertising. Continue to get the money. That might be.
Well, if you ever watch TV, there are commercials. Is that designed to make you keep watching it? You watch the Super Bowl, there's lots of commercials. Why is making someone keep watching it not speech? I mean, TV stations work by gluing your eyes to the screen. Not literally, but figuratively. What is speech? I love this case for a lot of reasons. One of it makes you really think hard of what actually is speech, right? Because look, I think Cody made the fair point. If you look at Facebook's website, there's going to be some posts from your friends, going to be some news articles, going to be some commercials and the like. Facebook argues that the entire everything, top to bottom, is Facebook speech. We're deciding what to put on our page. We're a newspaper, right? We have editorial column, we have personal ads, right? We have commercials, right? We have news articles. Isn't Facebook just like a newspaper? They just put this over here, put this over there for page 1, page 2, page 3. No?
I guess if it's expressive conduct, then it would be, the curating would be expressive conduct.
In other words, is there a difference between a newspaper editor saying, here's what's going on page 1, here's what's on page 2, here's what's on page 3, and the Zuckerberg algorithm saying, okay, boom, 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 boom. Here's what we're giving Jamar. Here's what we're going to show to Aaron. This is what we're going to show to Eric, because everyone gets a different page. We're not all seeing the same page. How's editorial judgment different between what the algorithm does and what the Miami Herald newspaper editor did?
I would say the newspaper is more journalized. It's not.
But journals aren't special. We did that first 5 minutes of class. Ooh. What?
Is it because, like, without the algorithm, the speech could potentially just not be getting out there at all?
So what? But the algorithm.
Speech.
But the algorithm is putting news articles, is putting pictures of
So
friends.
speech like that, but if you take the algorithm out of it and you just post like a TikTok or something, and you don't have anything to curate it, then it's not speech because it's not getting to anyone. Just
Why not? But I'm putting information online. But don't move past the algorithm. That's actually key to this case. What they're saying, the algorithm is their editorial judgment. That's how they're exercising their judgment. They're not doing it manually. They're doing it through a computer program. Why can't they do that?
Necessarily think there's any reason that they can't do it, but when then couldn't you simply go and say, well, thank you. It's my understanding that a lot of these social media companies they don't take liability for people saving
Oh,
something.
they don't.
So
Who knows about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act? Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, you were talking about Taylor Swift with us last week, weren't you? Yeah. Well, what happened with Taylor? I hope it's not too traumatic. The what? You said a word I don't know. The dads, Brads, and what? Like God, I'm old. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Go on. I didn't watch Super Bowl at all. Not a minute of it.
They're frustrated to hear and being shown on TV less than a minute long, and they created pornographic images using AI.
Yeah.
Show her or depict her being sexually involved in it.
Yes.
It got taken down very quickly because a lot of people reported it, but it was still out there.
Okay, so Section 230 is a law passed in 1996 or 7 as part of the Communications Decency Act. And what it says broadly, I'm grossly generalizing, is that if a internet platform hosts content, right, it's viewed as the content of the person who posted it, not the provider, right? In other words, if I post something on America Online, if you know what that is, the content is from the person who posted it, not AOL, as long as AOL takes it down in a timely fashion. So if I post defamatory material on Twitter or Facebook, I can be sued for defamation, but Facebook cannot because they're just the platform, right? They're not the ones actually creating it. But the irony here is that Facebook is arguing that we are curating, this is our speech, right? So it's our speech for purposes of the social media law, but it's not our speech for purposes of liability in Section 230. So they're trying to have it both ways. I think yeah.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, like, with that, we're starting to see potential liability coming up against social media platforms because of this instance, because it's something that's been happening to young women and girls for a long time, but then once the time finished, what they got catapulted into sexual abuse. And they're starting to wonder if these companies could be held accountable for taking down the AI or not having some way of identifying how it's AI.
Right. And I'll get you a second, Cody. The flip side, though, is if a law like Section 230 is repealed, would these companies be more hesitant about what can be posted online, right? Because they might be afraid of liability. And if Florida's law goes into effect or the Texas law goes into effect, how would that affect the ability of social media companies to moderate content? So someone does post information about Taylor Swift or someone else that people care about less, right? They might be afraid of taking it down because they give rise to a lawsuit. In other words, if they don't fully explain why they remove content, they can actually open up to exposure. It might result in even more speech being put online. So in other words, the Florida law is like an ultimate right of reply kind of thing, where you have to be able to give yourself online. If they don't explain it, you get to sue them for damages. So which law or which side promotes free speech? Texas says, and Florida says, we need this law to have more free speech so our citizens can speak on Facebook without being shadow banned. And then Facebook says, no, we have free speech because we're a company and we want to be able to, promote our views and curate. If you tell us what to say, you're violating our free speech rights. So in this case, there's free speech on both sides. In Red Line, free speech on both sides. In Tornillo, free speech on both sides. Seeing a pattern, right? In all these cases, there's the right of the citizen to speak and the right of the media company to speak, and they're always going to be at odds. Because every time you tell a media company, you must produce this content, that's something that they may not want to do, they're being forced to do.
I say I'm like stuck in my head, like different duty in this case. The social media platforms remember because there like just the ability to speak. But here I feel like the social media can see like, oh, look, this is our speech. It's now gotten to this point issue like point discrimination because they're only taking down things that they don't like.
Right. So again, is there state action? In other words, when Facebook takes down your content, right? Is there state action?
Well, we get in court.
Right, but why is it in court? What brings it to court? Before the Florida law, was there any way to sue Facebook for taking down content? If you read your terms of service, right, which we've all read very carefully, right? Yeah, right. You ever see the South Park episode about the terms of service? Episode called The Human Centipede? It's gross. But anyway, if you don't read the terms of service, it says you cannot sue us for anything. This is not a contract. In other words, we take down your material, too damn bad. But this law changes it. So to Cody's point about the viewpoint discrimination, this law effectively makes takedowns state action, which can be sued over. It's basically trying to impose, not exactly, but trying to impose the First Amendment onto social media companies that they can't do viewpoint discrimination. That if they take down one side, they have to take down the other side, or take down neither side. And the upshot is, they say this will allow people to keep hateful material on both sides up. They can't take it down. This, they say, will cripple content moderation. Did you hand it? Yes.
Like that was my main issue was the lack of safety. But I feel like when it comes to social media platforms, you can very easily make another profile if you get taken down.
Oh, you
You
can.
can create a new Gmail account. You can create a new email. You can.
You've never done that before.
I personally haven't because I've never banned social media.
Good.
But it's very easy to just make another one, get it off. So I feel like there's.
Are people complaining about not much?
I feel like it's not really.
Well, this comes back to the case I mentioned before when political candidates block someone on social media. Is it really a big deal to be blocked on social media? How easy is it to just find it for another username?
Very easy.
Yeah. People are just complaining. But it's some burden. It's a small burden.
Yeah.
And I think to Julianne's point, the reason why people are so upset is, let's say there's a story that's breaking news about the election, right? This happened with Hunter Biden's laptop, if you remember this. Remember this story? Right. And basically, Facebook banned the existence of the story. They couldn't publish it anywhere. Another one was with COVID, right? Any post that even had hesitancy for vaccinations was just banned altogether. So an entire body of thought was just eliminated from the only means of communicating in the world, because we're all stuck in our houses, right? You couldn't go anywhere. So the argument is, yes, you're right. You could, in due time, create a new account and post under a different name, but they'll just shut that one down too in a few seconds because of keyword searches.
I think it's interesting also to kind of look at platform and how their terms of service and their community guidelines work. I know with TikTok specifically, like anything related to COVID, it doesn't automatically get shut down. It just has a little note at the bottom. It's like, make sure that you do your own research as well because this might be inaccurate. Or like recently, a lot of the TikToks related to Palestine in that situation have been kind of shadow banned. And so I think it's interesting to see how each platform handles their own community guidelines and that Facebook and Twitter are the ones that issue and not so much some of the other platforms.
Always, and I think X has been a little bit more permissive since Musk took over. That's just my impression, at least. Curious, does TikTok have any policies about talking about China and lab leak, or they don't? No, they don't. Just curious. I don't know. That's just curious. You've read the guidelines? Really? Okay. And do they respond timely?
Gave me an update a week later, like we reviewed this and we found that this was a violation, or it wasn't.
Really? Was it a human review or an AI review? Was it about crocheting?
No, it was a picture of
What the heck? Huh?
Yeah, somebody reported it as like potential child abuse. It was like a TikTok of the child.
Were they trying to mess with you? All right, TMI. Thank you. Okay, so pictures of cats, abuse. Got it. I'm getting myself in trouble.
It does give
Yeah, I quit long ago, so I've not had that. I don't read the comment threads on my blog posts either. I ignore them. They don't exist. So this case we argued the Supreme Court in about a week. I might play some clips from it when it comes back to the court in about a week. It's a very this is an issue in which the conservatives in the court are going to be divided. I think you're going to have Thomas, Alito, and maybe Gorsuch come out pretty hard in favor of this law. I think the Chief and Kavanaugh might be sympathetic as well. So it might be a weird situation where, like, the court's liberals have to scrounge votes to save this law. It's not going to be what you expect. I don't know, but we'll see. All right. And there are questions on the NetChoice case. All right. Let's talk about New York Times against the United States for a few minutes. Let me just play some of the clip. I love. This is one of my favorite. Did you all watch the video? This is one of my favorite videos in the entire package. Hold on, let me bring it out. Of course.
Okay, and so then how again is the argument for when, like, if the government had encouraged the social media platforms to take certain things down?
Okay, that's a different case. All right, so there's also the jawboning case, which is called was it Murphy? They've changed the name. So the argument here is that the administration worked closely with social media companies to take down speech that was hesitant and critical of vaccines and the like. That's different because at that point, the government effectively becomes, the platform base becomes a state actor because basically you work in conjunction with the government. That's also for the Supreme Court this term. This is a lit term, as they might say nowadays, right? There's a lot going on. I don't know what the hell's going to happen by June, but there's a lot that's going to happen, right? Because you have the takedown of public officials, you have a NetChoice case, and you have the jawboning case. So you have 3 huge social media cases on the docket, along with all the other stuff about Trump and insurrection and immunity and so on. I always say this is the craziest term I've ever seen at the Supreme Court, and I always am wrong because the next term gets even crazier. And to wait till November of 2024. My goodness. What's that? So far, I mean, I say this is unprecedented. I've stopped saying it because it doesn't matter. All right, let me play. All right, any questions on the NetChoice case? Here, I like this one. Oh, let me fix the audio's not going to work. I'm going to do it in advance. Never works. It always wants to put output onto my microphone.
Provided the New York Times with a copy of the report. The newspaper would study the 7,000-page report for 4 months. On June 13th, 1971, the Times published the first article about the so-called Pentagon Papers. Later that day, President Richard Nixon discussed the report.
Oh, actually, you know what? Kissinger just died about a month ago. He was about 100 years old. I met him many years ago in New York. He lived a remarkable life.
The National Security Advisor. Nixon referred to the.
And by the way, you all know about the Watergate tapes? You know about the Watergate tapes? So President Nixon in his Oval Office had it was basically a device that would, a voice-activated tape recorder, so he was recording people's conversations. And this gave rise to the case of U.S. versus Nixon, which was about trying to seize the tapes.
And said it served the enemy. This conversation, and many others, were recorded by Nixon's secret Oval Office recorder. The following day, on June 14th, 1971, the Times published the second part of the series. By that time, the Nixon administration was already planning to take legal action against the newspaper. Yet, that evening, President Nixon expressed some hesitancy about prosecuting the Times.
Hell, I wouldn't prosecute the Times. My view is to prosecute the goddamn pricks that gave it to them.
Yeah.
So I want to just focus on that line for a bit, right? When you have a leak, who do you prosecute? The leaker or the newspaper that published them? So I'd say you publish the leakers, right? But you don't know who the leakers are. And the way you get after the leakers is by going after the newspaper. So this is kind of what they did in Branzburg, right? They twist the arm of the journalist to try and get to the leaker. But that's profanity.
Nixon asked John D. Ehrlichman, his advisor,
he went to jail.
Should the Times be prosecuted?
The reply was,
apparently so.
Wasn't true.
A few moments later, Nixon called John Mitchell, the Attorney General. Nixon asked Mitchell if the Department of Justice should take legal action against the Times.
What is your advice on that Times thing, John? You would like to do it? I would believe so, Mr. President. Otherwise, we will look a little foolish in not following through on our legal obligations.
All right, I'll pause now. So this goes on and on and on. Basically, what happens is the court seeks an injunction to block the publication of the so-called Pentagon Papers. These were, at the Times, classified documents discussing the war in Vietnam. Now, again, the Times had published some of them, but they wanted to block the publication of more. And this was, in every sense, a prior restraint of speech, right? You're trying to stop publication. And the Supreme Court ruled that, no, you can't stop the publication, but it was very fractured, and there were many different opinions. But the general gist is, in order to impose a prior restraint on speech, you must have an interest of the highest order, right? You must have some clear evidence why you need to stop this. And the government wouldn't give this. Well, just generally, this is very bad. We don't want to have this in the works. So this goes on, and eventually the Times prevails. And we'll just play this one more clip. Where is it?
In passing upon the activities of the executive branch of the government in the field of foreign affairs is very narrowly restricted. In the end, the Supreme Court lifted the injunction, and the newspapers were free to continue publishing articles about the penny.
By the way, did anyone see the movie The Washington Post, published a couple of years ago? It was about this case. It should have been called the New York Times. They picked the wrong newspaper. The entire thing about the Post, but actually the Times was in control. That's not important. They picked the wrong paper.
On June 30th, after the Supreme Court decided the case, President Nixon discussed the decision with his Henry Kissinger, the national security advisor, remarked that the decision
Would be superannuated fools like Black and Duck. That's what they do to the Cohen.
Kissinger suggested that if Nixon had
Two more appointments.
the 6-3 vote would have been different.
It didn't work.
Nixon replied,
No, it wouldn't.
both of Nixon's appointees, Chief Justice Berger and Justice Blackmun, ruled against the New York.
Why does one keep cutting out? That's very weird. Did you hear that on your end also?
Nixon would make 2 more appointments to the Supreme Court, Justices Powell and Rehnquist. Yet in United States versus Nixon, 1974, 3 of those 4 justices would rule against Nixon.
I can imagine Trump had the same conversation when Barrett and Kavanaugh kept rolling against him. I need 2 more.
Order the release of the White House recordings.
All right. I'll look at the audio later. All right. That's all I want to talk about the case. It's not really a press case, but it's sort of relevant. All right. Any other questions? All right. So let me just wrap up and let you guys go home a few minutes early. The press, not special. There's nothing special or unique about the press. Okay? When we're talking about the press, though, we ask, is the law sort of generally applicable? The grand jury law was generally applicable. Promissory estoppel, generally applicable. They can be enforced, right? You're not getting exemption from these laws. When we talk about rights of reply, I think the way we distinguish them is that under Red Lion, there's limited spectrum, there's limited space in the airwaves. Having a broadcast license is a privilege, not a right. We focus on the right of the speaker, right? The right of the citizen to reply. But with Tornillo, there's no license. It's a medium with limited space and columns. And so there's editorial judgment, and the newspaper is allowed to control what goes inside of it. That's how you reconcile those cases. Okay. Questions? Anything? All right. I will see you all next week. Thank you so much.